Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 17th February 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to be joined today by Diane Rasmussen McAdie from Scotland, who'll be, of course, on the link from Scotland, and also we'll be joined by Ben Rubin with the link from London. So welcome to both of you. I'm going to get started today with Ukraine because it is such a major driving force, not only in national politics at the moment, but also international politics. And we've got to the bizarre stage where, of course, Ukraine is effectively collapsing and panic has set in UK, well, not so much the US, but UK and the EU. And we now have Keir Starmer glibly talking about British boots on the ground. But of course, Keir Starmer will never be putting his boots on the ground to put his life at risk because he would prefer other people to do that for him. But I thought we would just have a little bit of a recap about the whole Ukraine situation. This is very simplistic. I've deliberately done this in order to help people focus on what I think are the key points. So let's bring this on screen. And of course, we need to go back to 2014 when the immense destabilization, the Maidan Revolution, was underway in Ukraine. And of course, we've pointed out that key political figures have been involved in that, both from the United States and the UK. But what I wanted to particularly remind people about is that even at that time in 2015, the BBC itself was warning about neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So a number of BBC clips came out on this subject, and those warnings from the BBC at that time were absolutely correct and absolutely genuine, but suddenly they all disappeared into the long grass because, of course, the objective of the US, the UK, NATO and the European Union was to foment this war at all costs in order to destabilize and hopefully unseat Putin. So we then end up in February 2022. The Russians had had enough and they started their special military operation. So what sort of thing were we being told in UK? Well, of course, we had senior military figures like Admiral Radakin telling us that Russia was losing. This was a theme that was spread right across the journalists reporting on the special military operation, although it quickly became apparent that this was far from the truth. Here's another headline from the BBC, another complete lie, which they persisted with until it was clearly too ridiculous to continue, and that was that Russia was struggling with the supply of weapons and ammunition in order to prosecute the war in Ukraine. And eventually we get to the situation where it's clear that Russia has outfought not only Ukraine, but also the combined might of the US, NATO, and the European Union. But at this point, we're really starting to see panic amongst the Western powers because, of course, the real agenda of the war, as we were told in the early days, was that this war would itself foment the collapse of Putin's presidency, and he would be gone in Russia. And following that, Russia would start to break up. Here's another headline here. As Russia advanced, we still had propaganda in the West trying to convince us that that advance wasn't happening. So in the small print from the Wall Street Journal, Russia's advance in Ukraine is slowing. Here's what's happening and why. Well, of course, this was another false report because that advance has not slowed. It's speeding up with immense Ukrainian casualties. So let's move on through, because of course the next thing that we understood was that the US, NATO and the EU were calling for Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian. And we should remember, of course, that it's widely acknowledged that former Prime Minister Boris Johnson worked behind the scenes very early on to scuttle any peace deal and effectively make this war happen in order to attack Russia. So where are we now? Well, nobody knows the true casualties. One I've heard recently is over 1 million dead, plus the wounded, at a ratio of probably 2 or 3 to 1. And of course, the Ukrainian casualties absolutely hidden from Western audiences so that the war can be prosecuted and supported by the Western military-industrial complex. Now, clues as to the horrific situation come from the fact that even Zelensky himself is trying to recruit 18-year-olds for slaughter on the battlefield. But now we're into the latest travesty, which is NATO and EU propaganda about peacekeeping troops, as we realise that this war is rapidly coming to an end and Russia has not lost. So here's Keir Starmer talking about British troops, peacekeeping troops on the ground, a bizarre statement because, of course, we've now got a Royal Navy with more admirals than ships. And we've also got former heads of the military, Danat here, saying that we simply do not have enough UK troops to put them into Ukraine. And also we've got Zelensky now stirring the pot with calls for a European army. And I'd like to say to the audience that if we go way back, the UK column was absolutely warning about this objective to create a single unified European military system. And it is extremely interesting that they're now using Zelensky to help get this agenda back on the table. But if we want to really understand how the West does propaganda, no better place to go than the Sun. And let's have a look at a little video clip that they put out a few days ago, terribly emotional, about a young British soldier who'd gone to Ukraine and within days he was dead. But according to the Sun's report, that was due to those nasty Russians and their nasty weapons. Let's have a look at the report.
A British teenager has died in a terrifying Russian drone hunt minutes into his first ever combat mission on the Ukraine front line. Foreign Legion volunteer James Wilton was just 18 when he died of appalling wounds after being chased by 3 of the killing machines. I've spoken to an American Foreign Forces soldier who was with the young Brit when he died. He told me how the drones herded panicking soldiers closer together in a bid to boost their kill count before zeroing in on tragic James. And the rookie recruit who had joined Ukraine's foreign force just 4 months earlier stood no chance. The American soldier called Jason, who we can't identify, spoke movingly yesterday as he told me how his British best friend died in his arms.
So this is absolutely a tragic story that this young man died. Of course, he was old enough to make a decision to take himself to the battlefield. But notice how the Sun puts it across. Terrible that this young man died. Those nasty Russians were using drones. And I got the full story by talking to what the reporter, the Sun reporter, describes as an American foreign fighter. What he really means is a mercenary. So let's have a look at the subject of drones and who's to blame. Here's a Sky News headline, and what is it talking about in 2023? UK pledges hundreds of new attack drones to Ukraine. We can bring this one in here, which is a UK government report, UK to supply more than 10,000 drones to Ukraine. And if we bring in this further one here from gov.uk, 30,000 new drones for Ukraine in boost to European security. It comes as a further 190 million for the UK-administered International Fund for Ukraine was announced following further pledges from allies. So this is UK and, of course, the US and the Europeans pumping drones into Ukraine. Well, let's see what the Ukrainians have been doing with their drones. And I'm going to say this is disturbing footage. There's much of the footage with both sides fighting that we simply cannot show. But this clip bear in mind what the Sun reporter had to say.
This Russian soldier risked his life to save his comrade. In a war-torn, artillery-ravaged Ukrainian town, the two were searching for their unit while Ukrainian drones hovered above. As they ran, they scanned every ruined building, hoping to find another ally. Eventually, they reached the remains of a collapsed house where an FPV drone attempted to target them. One of them grabbed a brick and tried to hit the drone. A tense game of hide-and-seek followed before they decided to flee. One soldier attempted to shoot the drone while the other took cover behind a tree. Several times, they narrowly escaped being struck. Finally, they hid behind the wooden stump of a tree. The drone hovered above, tracking their every move as they circled the stump, trying to evade it. At one point, an FPV drone closed in for a strike. They dodged, causing it to crash a short distance away. One soldier quickly got up and ran in another direction. Seeing this, his comrade made a bold move. He pointed at the drone and shouted, "Come hit me!" The Ukrainian sent another drone. He kept dodging, circling the stump, even hurling stones at it, none of which hit. Eventually, the drone got close and crashed, sending shrapnel flying. He was wounded.
So a classic example, I know that video is heavily edited, nevertheless it's representative of exactly what's happening on both sides of the fighting in Ukraine, that men are being hunted with drones. So the Sun newspaper report, deliberately emotional to wind up the hatred against Russia, when in fact the West is also pumping in these vile weapons, which are not only being used to hunt and kill groups of soldiers, but also, as you see there, one or two men on the ground. Simply disgusting. And it's a subject, of course, which the BBC simply doesn't want to talk about, because in the BBC's propaganda, there are no Ukrainian casualties in the fighting. So I'll leave you to think about that. I'll just end with this clip, which we will play. It's from a really excellent animated report of casualties in the Second World War. I've just selected some. So we're looking at coffins with a soldier on top, 60,000 for Switzerland, 380,000 killed for the United Kingdom. The United States is next in size with 407,000 killed. And we're looking down from an aerial view now on acres of coffins. Yugoslavia, 446,000 killed. The number of coffins is increasing. The aircraft is getting higher, and we're seeing more and more of the black dots of the coffins on screen. Japan, 2.3 million casualties. And we're moving on. It's increasing all the time. Into China, 3.8 million casualties. And now we move into something which is truly astonishing, and people in the West need to understand this. Germany at 5.3 million, and most of those casualties were in the Eastern Front, including Ukraine. And now we are just starting to look at a tip of the casualties in Russia. And this is an aircraft flying over acres and acres of AI-generated coffins on the ground. It's going on and on and on. And this is because the number of casualties in Russia is so vast. So we'll reach the limit in a minute, and it will pan back to the beginning, and you can see for yourselves what casualties we're dealing with in Russia. And meanwhile, in 2025, we have the combined might of UK, US, NATO, and the European Union absolutely hell-bent on promoting and continuing the slaughter. So there we are, 11.4 million casualties in Russia, and still the fighting in Ukraine hasn't stopped. We'll see what President Trump does. So against that background, Diane, I'm going to say welcome to UK Columns News. It's no surprise that your focus is on fear.
Thanks, Brian, and hello, Ben. No, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to talk a little bit about fear and how the mainstream media and other sources are trying to make us afraid and how they're going to keep us safe, apparently. So let's go back, first of all, let's go through some slides really quickly, just as some reminders and some very current examples of what they're doing. So if we look, for example, at, this is from December 4th and 5th, 2021, from the iWeekend newspaper. Everybody probably remembers these kinds of messages. The UK red alert over Omicron's ability to hit the double jabbed. So that color red seems to be something that has been going on. I didn't know viruses, if they exist, are red. But anyway, just from Saturday, from this weekend on Facebook, I saw this from Yorkshire Live. Brits urged to consider wearing masks again as a quademic of 4 viruses surge. On Thursday, the Daily Star said, the next slide, the WHO confirmed an outbreak of a deadly virus that kills half the people it infects. NTD television, I'm not really sure what that is, probably a low-quality source. Cats have been euthanized after testing positive for bird flu. One that I have from just a few weeks ago from here in Edinburgh Evening News, said Edinburgh is in lockdown. So there's that word again, lockdown, as schools and businesses closed due to extreme wind. And we had one day of bad weather, basically. Yesterday, the Scottish Sun said Scots are set for whiteout tomorrow, but the Met Office reveals a brighter days ahead. Just a few snowflakes here over this morning in Edinburgh, nothing that's even sticking to the ground. Here's another one. If you have a snake phobia, please look away, because I know I certainly do. However, this is adding to the fear. The Asclepian snake, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, which can grow up to 2 meters in length. It is Europe's biggest snake. It has established a healthy population in North Wales and in London, potentially living in your attics. So don't go in your attic if you live in those areas. Of course, Keir Starmer took a rapid home HIV test. I'm wondering if this is going to be similar to those lateral flow test kits that they were passing out as rubbish a few years ago. And alongside this, just a day after he took that test, and it was all over the news, the UK Health Security Agency published one day later that there was an increase in community testing for HIV in 2023 over 2022. It seemed a bit coincidental to me. So when I was thinking about this, one of the things that I thought about was one of the videos that I watched from the Davos meeting from last month. So these are 4 people in a panel called Scrolling Media's Future, which is talking about how people find information, what information they seek, who consumes news and how. And it's very important to note the 4 speakers that you'll see here. So we have Daniel Roth, who is the editor-in-chief and vice president of content at LinkedIn, which of course is owned by Microsoft. Ben Smith, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Semaphore, which is a media company. Mina Al-Arabi, the editor-in-chief at The National, and one of our best friends here at UK Column, James Hardings, founder and editor of Tortoise Media. So let's hear the very end of their panel discussion from Davos.
What do you see for the next?
I see the politicization of business, and I see politics turns into something much more transactional, and that is deeply worrying.
Anybody got a more optimistic take?
Can I mean,
yes.
Again, the Arab cynic here says, actually, there's been a real problem in American politics for about at least 2 decades. And I think this is some of it is accelerated. But, Iraq 2003, when the U.S. invaded Iraq, and what the system that they tried to bring into Iraq kind of was a way of legalizing corruption. And when you would argue against American officials who were overseeing this, yeah, but that's how we do it in the U.S. And you're doesn't mean it's right. So I think actually in some ways, people around the world and how they're looking at the U.S. is kind of this feels more transparent than some of the stuff that used to happen and would be packaged in ways, and there are congressional ways to sidestep, actually.
So this is the version of us you always saw?
Kind of politely, yes.
I have a different point of view on this. I think that
Give us the non-viral LinkedIn version.
I think less about the coverage of Trump as a business journalist. That is not a massive area of coverage, but I do think that I think you will get people writing about this, but it goes back to this idea that what is going to matter is people who have strong opinions and have brands. And you talked about community, you talked about building podcasts, but there are building a large community around a non-topic is not going to work. If you can build one around a topic where there's going to be someone who's going to make a lot of money covering Trump in a very hard-hitting way. There are already a lot of people who cover Trump in very glowing ways, and they are making a lot of money. It is a business model that works of having a strong point of view and then reporting it out.
What about trying to be fair and neutral?
That, I think, is going to be harder.
So there we have people from Davos telling us, including Tortoise Media and these other sources, that we can't be neutral, we can't be fair in the media, we have to have some kind of angle. So I looked at Semaphore because it was only briefly mentioned on the UK column, I think just about a year or two ago. Not too much detail, but I got really discouraged when I looked at it because the first story that I saw on Semaphore's website was about ChatGPT. This was from Friday, from Valentine's Day. And it was a story about whether you can have an AI boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whatever you want to have, AI companions, basically AI replacing a romantic relationship in your life. And I'll have more about that in Extra, by the way. The other thing that I want to talk about as well is predictive programming, which a lot of people are familiar with. We've been seeing news recently, another fear factor, NASA revealing all the countries that could be hit by an incoming asteroid in 2032. Sounding like, if you remember, Armageddon and Deep Impact were examples of two movies. Those were both from 1998 that talked about something that was going to come to hit the Earth and be destructive. But when we actually look at NASA's website about what they're saying about it, they're saying, well, there is something, it has a 2.3% chance of impacting Earth on 22 December 2032. And it might hit a city, but it's certainly not going to destroy the entire planet. And so I want to show what NASA is doing with predictive programming now. They have now the Planetary Defense Coordination Office, and they have created a trailer for a documentary that's coming out in April. Let's watch part of the documentary.
What would an asteroid that is a kilometer in diameter, what would it do if it hit the Earth?
That is likely to end human civilization.
Those objects are big enough to cause what we would call truly global devastation, meaning that they could cause global extinction events. The good news is that we found more than about 95% of them. When we get down to smaller objects, things that are larger than, let's say, about 100 meters across or so, now the picture's not so rosy.
Today, we do not have a complete inventory of all the possible impactors.
There's almost certainly a decent-sized asteroid out there that is going to pose an impact threat to the planet. We're just trying to find it right now.
And that is something that NASA and the worldwide planetary defense community has been endeavoring to do.
There's a huge community of astronomers that start observing it.
From all around the globe, finding asteroids, tracking them, calculating their orbits.
Asteroids don't care about international boundaries.
It doesn't matter where the asteroid impacts. It affects, the entire humanity. In fact, anything alive on the Earth.
I really like that I'm protecting the planet.
Let's say we do find something that poses an impact threat to Earth. What next?
The day is coming when Earth will get impacted.
The dinosaurs went extinct because they didn't have a space program. We do have one.
We can. So why stop there?
We know it will happen. We just don't know when it will happen.
So is that a Steven Spielberg film or is it a government documentary? I'm not quite sure. So if we go back to SPY-B and SAGE and all of the government advice that was given back out in 2020 and how it was followed, I just want to remind people that SPY-B, which was covered extensively on UK Column, said that a substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened. The perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased among those who are complacent, using hard-hitting emotional messaging. And it was in bold originally, to be effective, this must also empower people by making clear the actions they can take to reduce the threat. So we're definitely talking about putting fear into people's minds. And so here, just to talk about that connection between fear and safety, you all remember these messages from 2020. We're seeing them again. This was all about, wearing a mask to stay safe. This was a photo I took in a shopping center in Glasgow at the time. And to go back to this person called Carl Mannheim, who was the original sort of inventor of social distancing in terms of terminology, who said that it's one of behavior patterns which is essential to the persistence and continuity of an authoritarian civilization, basically saying that this type of distancing can be demonstrated in the case of fear. If I keep a safe space, there's those words again, being safe, between myself and the stranger who is stronger than me, the spatial distance between us there is contained in the mental distance of fear. And that's the academic paper that is from is going to be in the show notes. So I think we're seeing a clear fear campaign. They're going to make us safe, but I'm not sure what they're going to do about this, but that's what I'm seeing right now, Brian.
Diane, thank you very much. Excellent segment. And what do we hope that our audience will be doing is understanding what's happening and warning other people about what is happening, because that is the best way to take the fear factor away. Of course, laughter is also particularly good because we are now into crazy times. Ben, if Diane is giving us the fear factor, we've already seen the war, which is another of course, attack on people's minds, making them fearful and anxious. You are absolutely staying on the case of the people behind the scenes who are driving this world turbulence. And of course, these are the very people that Keir Starmer thinks are more important than Westminster.
Indeed they are. Have no fear, everybody. Hello, it's nice to be here. And we're going to continue on the fear theme because we're going to talk about climate change. And we're going to look at the very top of the global pyramid. And we're going to ask the question, who's really pulling the strings of the global climate change agenda? And we're going to start here with these ladies. This is where I left off last week. And this image came from this lady here, Lisa Witter, who is the Chief Executive of the Apolitical Foundation. We've spoken about her a lot previously. She's going to give us a little hand kicking things off today. So she's from Apolitical. She's also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. And she used this slide, which I'm just going to reintroduce to everyone. I've shown it a few weeks ago, where it shows the integration of the two main global power structures, the government and the financial markets, the public and the private sectors, being driven by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. You can see that that ring in the center, that's the 17 SDGs, that's binding together these two global power structures. That meets Mussolini's definition of fascism. I'll add that in over the top. Just give Lisa a little helping hand there. She forgot to put it on. And at the bottom, you can see, importantly, if you wouldn't mind just bringing that back up, thank you very much. You can see in bold the big propaganda narrative driving everything forward, what they call major threats. We've just been talking about fear. These are the major threats. The one that's the biggest at the top in bold is climate change. Yeah, so the fear narrative, the propaganda narrative that's driving this fascist agenda is the climate change narrative, right? Really important to just set that out up front. Now, back to the image. We're going to talk a bit about this lady today. That's Mary Robinson, who currently runs something called Project Dandelion. And that relates to the badges that you can see. So, at least 6 of the ladies in this image are wearing badges, green and yellow badges. Yeah, and it's one of these, right? So that's a dandelion. And it relates to this Project Dandelion, which is a women-led global campaign for climate justice, which launched about a year ago. And you can see in the right-hand corner there, every issue is a climate issue. Really importantly, every issue is a climate issue, right? They're turning everything into a climate issue. And let's hear a little bit more about dandelions from some of the ladies in this short video.
Our climate is in crisis.
I believe we can solve it.
I am clear-eyed about the challenges, and I choose hope.
I will be part of the solution.
I will share my ideas.
Above all, I will act.
I am a dandelion.
And like a dandelion, I am resilient.
I am relentless.
I will find any opening
in every path
to make more dandelions.
Together, we will build a future
where everyone is safe
from a changing climate.
I am a dandelion.
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 I'm a dandelion. Are you?
Our climate is in crisis, but I have hope. I will act. Yeah, I'm quoting from the video here. And importantly, like a dandelion, I am resilient. I am relentless. I will find any opening in any path to make more dandelions. Yeah, very clearly telling you what they're up to, what they're about, and spreading this message. And obviously, it's a nice analogy because dandelions, they get everywhere. Yeah, actually, if they get caught on the right gust of wind, they can travel for thousands of miles. And this is how they're spreading this climate message through this network, intimately linked to the SDGs. So we can actually see, I don't know if you noticed in the film, that's Mary Robinson again. You can see the Dandelion badge on her left lapel, her left, not our left. And then also on the other lapel, the SDG badge. Yeah, these things are very, very closely linked. Have to understand the symbolism here. These sigils, these brands, these names are how this message gets spread. And that shows that this fascist and this climate agenda are in one place being pushed forward by Mary Robinson in particular. And who is she? Just give you a little bit more background. So she's former president of Ireland. She said she was elected by the women of Ireland, who instead of rocking the cradle, rocked the system. She was then a UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, did a lot of time at the UN, and now calls herself a climate justice champion, saying we are the first generation to understand how serious the climate crisis is and the last generation to be able to do something about it. She was actually the UN envoy for climate when the SDGs were introduced in 2015. Yeah, so she's intimately involved in this whole agenda. She sends out a personal message on the Project Dandelion website. You should go and read this, saying, we are calling on women of the world to unite in action for a climate-safe world. A climate-safe world. I'll come back to that term in a minute. Just, as I say, go and read the letter, but importantly, it says that we will build a chorus of voices that will help us to reach and motivate 2 billion people to act for climate justice, united under a single vision. And this is a single vision for delivering what they call climate justice. It's going to be delivered by 2 billion people, which is basically, it's like a quarter of the women on Earth, right? This is all very much focused on women. It's a lot of people. And they're going to deliver what they call a climate-safe world. Let's find out a bit more about what that means.
That I don't have to worry anymore. I'm extremely stressed, worried, can't figure out how we're going to get there. And if I wake up tomorrow and it's done, it's like, what a relief.
We would be using the sun for all of its glory, and we would have enormous amounts of electricity to power so many things or everything on our planet. We would no longer be using fossil fuels. The asthma rates would be disappearing.
What I would be most excited for is to actually have everyone in our communities access nature and access clean air and access clean water.
I'd be most excited to know that my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren had a future.
And I think that says it all. And I think a lot of people would agree.
So a lot of this is about fear, as we've been talking about. The women in this video, some of them, they've just been propagandized, frankly, by the people behind this program, right? So they're worried, they're fearful, they want to change things, but they don't really know how. There's a lot of poorly articulated solutions, a lot of it based on climate tech, regenerative or sustainable energy systems that we know don't work in most countries on Earth. They are tapping into some very valid concerns that people have about the impact that humanity is having on the natural world. And I think they're very cynically doing this. And also there's this, what I think about as the weaponization of the maternal instinct. So the lady at the end there saying she's worried about her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren's future, as she should be. But it's being manipulated and hijacked by the people behind programs like this, frankly, in order to deliver this fascist agenda coming down from the UN and elsewhere. So they've got a bunch of demands, as you'd expect. I'll just focus on a couple of these. The first one, top right, number 3, pay up to those least responsible but most impacted. So a lot of this is about wealth redistribution. And then number 7 there, elevate women-led climate solutions. So basically put women in charge of everything and direct a lot of funding towards them, actually, if I'm being cynical about this. Like, a lot of this is about women seeking high-powered jobs, particularly in the upper levels of organisations like this and the ecosystem surrounding them. They've got a bunch of lobbying going on. As I said, every issue is a climate issue. So Mary Robinson is saying that the climate crisis is just unfair. It's unfair to women and girls, so we have to change everything. Another one here, sexual and gender-based violence is a climate issue. I'm really not sure how that is. And then a personal favourite is that extreme weather events impact menstrual justice. And that's a new one for me. I've never heard of menstrual justice before, but here we are. So they're getting a lot of high-level coverage. So this is Mary Robinson speaking at COP in the Faith Pavilion. There's a big overlap here with interfaith issues. It seems to be where they've landed it, and also Indigenous people. The Pope was in on the act. Apparently he's a dandelion as well. He's got a badge in his hand there. We spoke about the Vatican last week as well. Bunch of celebs. So that is actually Donatella Versace on the left, and Annie Lennox from the Eurythmics on the right, who is calling herself a global feminist these days, and she's got one of those badges on as well. And they got loads and loads and loads of supporters. For all those who choose hope, we choose you. Importantly, just to land back on the symbolism thing again, that's a Ukraine flag, right? Go and look at the website. Those colours are Ukrainian colours very, very clearly. And actually, the yellow at the bottom there, where the supporters are, I think that's important, because actually groups using this colour to organise people, I just think bear a little bit of scrutiny. You know, they might be up to no good. So who have we got on the list? Apolitical Foundation, Gates Foundation, the B Team, the Rockefeller Foundation, Skoll Foundation, a lot of the top-level philanthropic groups, Vital Voices, who I've spoken about previously, which is the US State Department and Hillary Clinton-backed global network of powerful women in commerce and politics. But importantly for today, I'm going to focus on one of them, which is this organisation, which is the Elders. And the Elders was founded in 2007 by Nelson Mandela. They call themselves an independent global leaders network working together for peace, justice, human rights, and a sustainable planet. Climate crisis is a big focus for them. Also multilateralism, gender equality, intergenerational dialogue. It's very exclusive. There's 12 people on the Elders Committee. You can see them at the bottom there. Founded, as I mentioned, in 2007 by Nelson Mandela, who is, as I understand it, a 33rd degree Freemason. He was anyway. He's obviously died in 2013. It's currently chaired by Juan Manuel Santos, who's that guy just second in from the left, who is also known as Blair's man in Bogota, and he was one of the global leader of Tomorrow class of 1993, alongside Blair, Brown, and Vladimir Putin as well, actually, as we understand it. There's a great article from Winter Oak, which you should go and read, by Paul Kudenek, which we'll provide a link to, which gives a great background on him. And then Mary Robinson, who was chair of the Elders from 2018 to 2024, she left in October last year, I'm guessing to focus more on this Dandelions program. And importantly, also an elder is Ernesto Zedillo on the right there, who's a former president of Mexico. And last summer, back in June, Mary Robinson and Ernesto Zedillo and Ban Ki-moon, who is also an elder, former Secretary of the UN, went to meet Antonio Guterres at the UN to talk about global security issues, Israel, Palestine, and how to strengthen multilateralism amid geopolitical tensions. So Zedillo is obviously a close confidant and advisor to Mary Robinson, and he is a senior emeritus member of the Group of 30. And the Group of 30 is the absolute pinnacle of the global financial system, right? So they provide oversight of the Bank of International Settlements and the global central banking system. The majority of members of the Group of 30 are current or former central bankers. So people like Mark Carney, who's currently the chair, Andrew Bailey, who's the current governor of the Bank of England, he's on the Group of 30. And this is right at the top of the pyramid. Let's have a little look at a few of the other characters. You can see Augustine Carstens there, the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements, Janet Yellen, chair of the Fed, Tim Geithner, US Treasury Secretary, Jacob Frenkel, former governor of the Bank of Israel, former chair of JP Morgan Chase International. And then on the far right of the picture, you can see Ernesto Zedillo, who is a senior emeritus member of the G30, which connects this group directly down to Project Dandelion. Yeah, Ernesto Zedillo at the G30 and the Elders, Mary Robinson at the Elders and Project Dandelion, turning every issue into a climate issue to get 2 billion people, predominantly women, to act for climate justice in order to drive through this totalitarian global system.
Ben, thank you very much. What can we say to our audience? The information has been all there on screen for you this morning. We hope that you'll share it with other people so that they can understand that their politicians in Westminster are making none of the decisions. All of the decisions are being made by the World Economic Forum and these agents. And this is the reason that Keir Starmer says he's got no interest in Westminster. He'd rather do his business in Davos. So it's out there. Please share it. Now, a huge thank you to everyone who supports the UK column. If you're not supporting us yet, please consider doing this. You can make a donation, or you can take out a membership, a monthly, an annual, or a lifetime membership. Of course, you can buy through the UK column shop. And as we always like to point out, we have Clive de Carle health products, and we make a small percentage off those. So if you're interested in health and you feel you need something, that also helps the UK column. Now, as I've just mentioned to the audience, the information we put out is to be shared. This is why we do it, is to spread the word, the information, the evidence as far and wide as possible. So this is where our audience can be like those very little dandelion seeds spreading on the wind far and wide. And this is a very important thing to do because essentially we can outgrow the powers that Ben has shown us so clearly and what their agenda is. Now, I'd like to say to the audience that we've had a really tremendous response to our new UK column on location, which is Saturday, the 5th of April in Cheltenham. We will put out more of the people speaking in due course, but Catherine Gunn, Alex Thompson and Patrick Henningsen will certainly be speakers. Tickets are going remarkably quickly. So over a third of the tickets have already gone. So we're going to say to UK column members and also new people, if you want to come to this event, we advise you to get online and get hold of a ticket as soon as you can, because this is quite unprecedented response. We think we've hit the correct button with the subject of the deep state. And of course, the location couldn't be better in Cheltenham. So if you haven't got a ticket, please do. Now, tomorrow we're putting out this interview, and I think this is one of yours, Ben, with Rosie Marshall. Is that correct?
It is, yes. It's a fantastic discussion with Rosie Marshall, talking about the amazing work that she's doing with an organisation called Forest of the Fallen in her hometown of Sydney, Australia, to commemorate those that have been injured and killed by the COVID vaccines.
Okay, thank you very much. And as always, we're delighted to advertise the Public Child Protection Wales Conference, 22nd of January. That's going to be in a location near Newport, South Wales, and tickets are £5. These ladies have done brilliant work exposing the abuse of children through the education system. So please do give them support. And we're also going to put a call out for people to help support the fundraiser, which is all about ethical raw milk dairy farming. So you can have a look at that on the GoFundMe page. But this is clearly an issue to do with our health and food, and you can help out by subscribing and donating to that campaign. Now, moving on, I do have a focus today on the BBC as always, because this multi-billion-pound operation is simply so disgraceful. But strangely, over the weekend, I was talking to a particular lady on the subject of Epilim, the drug Epilim, also known as sodium valproate. And then this morning, I was faced with a BBC article. Let's have a look at it on screen. So the headline was Mum's 20-year fight for epilepsy drug compensation. This is typical BBC because the focus is not on the problem, it's on compensation. And whilst we understand that will be very, very important to families affected, it doesn't stop the root problem. But we wanted to highlight here that back in 2008, UK column was warning about Epilim, sodium valproate, and we'd focused on this tragic story of a little girl approaching 13 who died as a result of this horrible drug. This was the opening paragraph. Helena Bai from Porthcawl died in University Hospital, Wales in 1978 after a catalogue of clinical failures in Bridgend Hospital. At the end of her young life, Helena's parents were kept from her bedside as the hospital lied that she was still alive. In truth, Helena was already dead, and her major organs had already been stolen by the NHS. This is a really awful story, and the fact that it is still coming to the surface after all these years is a credit to Helena's parents, who've never let it go. Over a period of some 8 months, and despite a monthly meeting with Dr. Jones, Helena suffered horrible symptoms, including aggression, lethargy, nausea, hallucinations, gastric irritation, body tremors, confusion, hyperactivity, behavioural disturbances, vomiting and incontinence. Joan and Derek Bai have no doubt that Helena was killed by the side effects of the drug Epilim. That is what we said back in 2008. But since then, Helena's mother, Joan, holds the official documents which actually acknowledge that Helena died from sodium valproate side effects. And if we just continue on through this is the part of the story which is so upsetting and important, because the cover-up was across all of the agencies that should have been protecting this little girl and others like her. So we describe an evil conspiracy of lies, deceit, inaction and cover-up across the NHS, the police, the judiciary, the General Medical Council, the coroner, MPs and the government. And there can only be one assumption, and that is that the agenda was to protect the big pharma companies and cover up what had actually happened to the little girl as a result of side effects. Now, the UK column many years ago was able to interview Helena's father, Derek. This is just a screenshot from the interview at the time. Unfortunately, we've lost part of this material when UK column was censored by various online platforms, but you can still go onto the UK column and listen into this audio report where both the father, Derek, and the mother, Joan, are talking about this tragic case. And if you look at the date, this is way back in 2015. The BBC did manage to report in 2006 on this case. And one of the things it says at the bottom of the article, too small, I know, for the viewers to read, but it says, the couple, that's mum and dad, now face the unbearable task of planning Helena's 4th funeral. And the reason for that is that body parts that have been sent for experimental purposes kept turning up in hospitals around the country. So the BBC reports on Helena Bai 28 years later in that 2006 report. But of course, we've still got warnings about this drug. The MHRA still not getting to grips with the danger. Here's the Mail, the drug that's harmed more children than thalidomide. And if we finally end on the BBC report here, here's the BBC that has effectively failed to do anything to get to grips with the danger of these pharmaceutical products 47 years on. So I will end there. Well, actually, add one more slide here, because this is BBC News in 2016 acknowledging of people dying from medical drug trials. But of course, when we moved into the era of the COVID-19 scandemic, the BBC simply didn't want to talk about the dangers of medical experimentation through vaccines. So we'll leave it there. There will be more on this story in due course, but a tragic story, and there have been thousands of other children suffering alongside Helena Bai. Diane, let's bring you on. We're switching from health matters to space. Take us away.
That sounds like a good idea, Brian, which is exactly why I like to study space and keep up with it. I'm not sure that our viewers know that I used to work at NASA as a researcher years and years ago, so I have some insight into NASA, and it still continues to fascinate me. But I want to take us into a story of what is apparently the British space industry So if we go to 29th of January this year, it was there was a tweet posted by a company from up here in Scotland called Orbex Space. They've been trying to make a rocket for a few years now. In 2022, they first got over £40 million from an investor from the Scottish National Investment Bank and some other sources. So that's quite a bit of money. But then on the 29th of January, it was announced by Labour that they have invested another £20 million into making a rocket. And an Octopus Ventures, we all know Octopus, is also a funding source right now, as well as the Export and Investment Fund of Denmark and a private investor. So all that is there in the tweet. What Labour is saying currently about this is it's part of the UK Space Agency. They're trying to do something with it, saying that we've never been part of the space race very much here in the UK, which isn't true. I'll get into that later. But it's all part of the plan for change, and it all has to do with sustainability. We could just play a few seconds of a silent video that I've put up here as well. This is called Saxe Voord. This is where Orbex is going to launch this rocket, assuming it ever actually gets built. This is located on the Isle of Unst in the Shetland Islands at the very, very northern tip of the UK. So it's an island at the top of Shetland, which is way at the top. So we can see, it's very beautiful grounds. It's, so they decided this was the perfect place to put a spaceport for whatever reason. I guess it does stay out of the way of things. But, again, I think it's kind of a shame that they've ruined such beautiful landscape by putting this spaceport in the middle of it. Saxe Voord has had some problems as they've been trying to build it. It started in 2022 in March, but the problem was that the contractors that were there originally were being sent home because they didn't have enough work for them and they weren't ready for the next stages of the work. In 2023, in November, it was reported they owed contractors £1 million that it couldn't pay for building the spaceport. So the contractors were sent home, they couldn't get paid. However, in 2024, in December, just a couple of months ago, Orbex suddenly just abandoned another spaceport in the far north of the Scottish mainland, so right at the top, but again on the mainland of the UK, called Sutherland Spaceport, to go to Saxe Voord. We're not really sure why. I couldn't find any reasons, but essentially Orbex announced that it would start taking over the construction of the Sutherland Spaceport, which was the original one, in November of 2022. And so that one wasn't finished. And then suddenly 2024, we've moved to Saxe Voord. There's only been one launch so far from Saxe Voord. That was in August of last year when a German rocket company launched a rocket, but the rocket engine exploded because of an apparently unusual oxygen fire. We don't really know why or what the issue was, but there's some detailed explanations that I've read. Saxe Voord is apparently Western Europe's only fully licensed vertical launch spaceport, meaning it can go directly straight up, of course. And Labour leaders are seeing this as an opportunity to get ahead in the space race when the UK, according to them, again, isn't true, has not been able to make a claim in this area, and that they're saying this would be the first UK launch capability. Again, according to Orbex, the investment comes as the government vows to develop Britain's mission to regularly launch into orbit from its shores using UK-manufactured rockets, supporting growth in its expanding space industry, and attracting investment from across the globe. So we can see there it's pretty much built at this point, Brian. If you could go to the next video, which was Sir Chris Bryant MP, the Minister for Space. And can we see what he had to say about it? Or what do we have up next?
If we were able to get launch to happen successfully with British rockets and British expertise on Shetland later this year, that would be a real strategic advantage for this country, something we could all take pride in, and also something that would drive economic growth for the future.
Right, so he's our Minister for Space. And one thing I want to mention about Frank Strong here, who is the owner of Saxe Voord Spaceport and the land around it, is that if you look at Company's House, he had a company called Space 2030. And I just want to point out that the UN has a Space 2030 agenda, space as a driver of sustainable development. So potentially a bit of an interesting coincidence there. So what is Orbex Prime going to do? I think we have a short video from Orbex.
It all began in 2016 when we started building a new space rocket to take small satellites into orbit. It's now 2022 and it's time to introduce Orbex Prime. This is one of the most environmentally sustainable rockets ever built. And right now, it's sitting on a launch pad in Scotland.
So we're all about sustainability. If we look at the next slide here, we've got a little bit from Octopus Ventures talking about why they're funding it, saying that it's to move towards a low-carbon economy, decarbonizing global energy systems and infrastructure. The founders are intent on greening finance. That's another interesting spin on the green agenda, the climate finance and so on. In November 2024, the UK Space Agency that I mentioned previously put out a climate change adaptation report. And if you read this report, it appears to be about fighting so-called climate change and finding things that could go wrong if climate change gets in the way of the satellites that are operating, that are going up there, that Elon Musk is putting up there and so on. They're trying to say that some of the priorities include sustainability, which of course, here's that word safe again, taking a leading role in keeping space safe and accessible now and in the future, and also talks about observing Earth. So the point is that these satellites that are going to be launched by Orbex, if it does ever get into space, are going to support disaster response efforts, track climate change, help us with navigation and communication, satellite phone networks, and space-based broadband. So of course, there's Elon Musk and SpaceX, and there's been a deal recently down in Yorkshire with a company providing a £20 million contract to SpaceX for some things that is being built there. So a little bit more money coming into the economy, I guess. If you look at back into July 29th, 2020, there was the first ever space launch, or was it? I don't know. Let's look at Brian and Mike talking about this back 5 years ago. I think we have a short clip from them.
This is Black Arrow. There's a close-up of what it looked like. Black Arrow carried out 4 test launches between 1969 and 71. It was a 3-stage satellite carrier rocket. This was the first and only successful orbital launch carried out by the UK, and it took place 3 months following the sudden cancellation of the project. The launch site was scrapped as soon as the launch was completed, and half of the scientists and engineers involved in the project lost their jobs immediately. Now, why was the project cancelled? Well, it was cancelled because the whole project got messed up with or linked into the shenanigans were going on about getting us into the European Union, and that technology ended up being given to the French.
Yeah, so ultimately it went to the European Space Agency and the Ariane project. So that was 5 years ago, and now here we are saying, well, this is the first chance ever for the UK, Ryan.
Yes, fascinating, isn't it? When we do something and we should be proud of it, it's simply given away to another country or group of countries. A lot to be discussed on your segment there, Diane, and we'll bring that through into UK Column Extra. Ben, let's end today's news with, well, really, if you're an adult in UK, you shouldn't worry, because the plan is that we simply consult our children on what we should do. Take us away.
Yeah, let's be guided by 7-year-olds, right? This is the best idea. So look, AI is the top-down control mechanism for global governance. Yeah, it's the method through which global fascism is going to control every area of our lives. So who do we want to hear about most? Their opinions on AI? It's the kids. Let's find out.
Everywhere we go, every time we scroll, and even day to day in our classrooms, we're constantly hearing 2 letters, AI. Artificial intelligence has been described as the biggest change in the way we all live our lives since the dawn of the internet. But how helpful or how harmful could it really be? Today, hundreds of young people across the UK have been brought together to try and answer those questions. This is the first ever Children's AI Summit.
What
What should world leaders and programmers do to address these important areas of AI?
These days, AI is used for everything, from writing essays to diagnosing medical conditions. The aim today is to create a children's AI manifesto that will be presented to world leaders at a global AI conference in Paris. Several of the speakers here have been on research missions to examine how AI is impacting different parts of our lives, for better and for worse. But what have they found out?
Over-relying on AI can impact students' problem-solving, critical thinking and creativity. There are loads of positives as well. It can adapt to students' educational needs and interests. I'm a big fan of space, crypto and Taylor Swift. So it can use that information to create personalized learning experiences.
AI uses lots of energy in order to function properly. Usually they use fossil fuels for the energy source. They have to use liquids to cool down, which means they're using more resources.
If you had to have a message for the world leaders, what would you say?
Maybe they could try and use more of reproducible energy, like solar energy or wind energy, to power their AI models.
Brian, what do you reckon? I know you like the music because I can see you dancing, but have you got any response to that?
Well, of course, what we're watching on screen appears amusing and there's children there, so people go a bit soft. But the people running the real agenda, they absolutely hate us to the extent that they're going to use our own children against us in order to drive their perverse agenda. So when I watch these children, they have been brainwashed and they're being controlled via a brainwashed reframing seminar in order to give opinions which they can't possibly know at that age. So this is child abuse, but it's being portrayed as if these children are super intelligent and can advise adults on AI. It's truly disgusting. I'm sorry to spoil the party because the music was quite good, but it was disgusting.
Yeah, I agree. Deeply, deeply cynical. And yeah, I think it is child abuse. I think you're absolutely right. And should we just quickly find out who's behind that child abuse? So you've got the Alan Turing Institute and Queen Mary from University of London, but this is all supported by Lego, importantly, who are really deeply embedded in Cabinet Office, by the way. We'll have to talk about that another time. And also EY, my alma mater. And whoever signed this off at EY, Katrina Campbell, if that was you should be ashamed of yourself, my dear. Anyway, moving on. This was the lady at Queen Mary's. This is a senior ethics fellow called Dr. Mary Aitker. I think I'm saying that right. Who's actually got AI in her name twice, which is quite entertaining. There's nothing ethical about what she's just done. Let's be honest. They produced this thing at the end of it, which is obviously not pre-baked, right? Because that kid, he's not really an actor, is he? Although, yeah, he is an actor. And that child at the end couldn't have been more than about 6 or 7 years old. I mean, the whole thing's absolutely hideous, isn't it? In order to usher in what? Well, let's be honest, global tyranny, because this is what was happening at the AI summit where that little board was sent to, aligning urban AI, so smart cities, and global AI governance. That's what it's all about. That's from Claudia Chalice at Democracy Next, who I'll be talking about again in the next couple of weeks. So there's no depths to which they will not stoop to push their agenda through.
And thank you very much for joining me. I'll just end by saying to the audience today, wherever you are in the world, if we are to stop this nonsense, we need millions of people to lift the lid and expose it for what it is, challenge it, say no, say you're not having it, and above all, really look after your children and watch who is trying to teach them and what they are trying to teach our children, because of course the children represent the new generation, and if we lose that, we're gone. So there is a lot you can do, but challenge it. And also a last reminder today, at least for the UK column on location, the 5th of April, tickets going very quickly, we're delighted to say. So if you haven't got a ticket, please get online and make that booking. We'll end there. Thanks very much for joining us today. If you're a member of UK column, stay with us for UK column extra in just a few moments. Thank you. Bye-bye.